Welcome to the Number One Comics Podcast. This is the podcast dedicated only to first issues. I'm your host, Jonah, and with me is Bill.
How's it going?
Bill, welcome back. Thanks for joining me again.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate that. Well, I'm not going to even comment on the wardrobe this time around because I'm...
Oh, hold on. We can do a cut here real quick. There we go.
Oh, I don't even recognize you.
I know.
You look completely different.
Man.
Well, this is our fourth episode.
Yes.
And tonight we are talking about Sleepwalker #1. This is an interesting one because we've talked about New Avengers, we talked about Astonishing X-Men, Spider-Man, and then now we're talking about Sleepwalker, which I think to some is maybe a tertiary character at best.
Yeah.
But I'm a big fan of the concept and of the character.
Of him, yeah.
Oh, he's so good.
This was kind of during the new superhero boom to get people back into comic books too.
You don't see this anymore,
you
right?
Really don't.
With like new characters being created by these major publishers.
Yeah, if anything, I mean, you probably see like limited series of like a solo thing for an already established character. But,
right.
This was right around the time we had a lot of new superheroes coming out. We had Darkhawk, which was another big one.
Darkhawk. We had all new Guardians of the Galaxy characters.
Yep.
We had
New Warriors.
New Warriors characters that were pretty new. Hence the name, I guess.
Right.
We had a new version of Ghost Rider.
Yep.
Which was different than the original. Slapstick.
Yes.
Can't forget about Slapstick.
Slapstick was amazing.
So yeah, this was a really cool time for comics, especially for new people getting into comics and starting out with, from the ground floor. You're not coming in on Spider-Man issue 350 something. You're coming in with a new #1, a new character. And what was also cool about this, as I'm sure we'll talk about at some point in the future when we get to some of these other issues, this is a time too when you didn't have to have a Wolverine or a Spider-Man guest starring in your new character's book to garner new sales.
Right.
Because if you think about a lot of what kind of came after this, it might have been a brand new character, but then here's Spider-Man who's swinging in for a scene, or here's Wolverine who's there for a hot minute. You don't have any of that with this.
Well, and a lot of these new ones were still based in New York too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was already an established pattern with Marvel is that the first issue would be like a standalone one, and like the second or third one maybe you'd have a guest appearance from like Spider-Man or Daredevil or something like that.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't take over. You know what I mean? But yeah, I always really enjoyed Sleepwalker. I thought he's like a heroic Freddy Krueger almost.
Very much so, yeah.
Except he's not killing people in their dreams. He's
and
actually...
he doesn't really have the same sense of humor that Freddy does.
No.
Because that's something, Freddy's a killer, but he's
a little more stoic.
He's funny. Well, let's talk about just some of the quick nuts and bolts. So, published by Marvel Comics. This one was published in June of 1991. Cover price on it was only $1. Could you imagine paying $1 for a comic book?
Jeez.
And at the time, I remember I was probably like
days.
Begging my parents to buy it for me because I'm sure I didn't have $1 to my name. But but that's crazy. So this was written by Bob Budiansky, and the artist was Brett Blevins. This is the first appearance of this character.
Right.
So he did not appear in another title beforehand and then got his own series.
That's true. There were a lot of ones that got their own titles that like made appearances in like an annual or something like that.
Yep, correct. Or, we'll talk about it because it was another one of my first issues was Cage, Hero for Hire. Got his first well, not his first series, but his 90s solo series off the back of his guest appearance in the Punisher comics.
Right.
When Punisher turned black for like 3 issues.
Yeah.
And then went to Chicago and met Cage. Which was a wild story that you wouldn't tell today, but the 90s were a crazy time. I loved them. And Cage, that's another one of those titles that I jumped on at the very beginning and followed all the way through to the end, much like this one. And so, we talked about this weird era where characters like Darkhawk and Sleepwalker, they're debuting here and not in other titles, which was very cool. Sleepwalker he's an alien from the dreamscape dimension. He possesses superhuman physical abilities such as a warp gaze that enables him to manipulate the shapes and physical characteristics of objects. He's also got the power of flight as well. And he's actually named, weirdly enough, he's named after his race. So his race is, they're Sleepwalkers. That's the actual race that they're called. Let's go ahead and go through a real quick synopsis. Again, not really page by page or scene by scene, but let's lay out the story beats for people. We're introduced to Rick Sheridan. He's dropping shots on a basketball court. A mysterious, terrifying being suddenly appears to him, and he's startled awake. And he realizes it was just a bad dream. Cut to the early morning. Rick, he doesn't seem to be much of a morning person. He's kind of trapped in this fog of grogginess. Now, luckily, he has his pooch Rambo to turn on the morning news, the radio, the lights. I'm pretty sure he probably makes breakfast for the guy or starts him a pot of coffee. Later that day, Rick is walking with his girlfriend, Alyssa, and she's very much a 90s basic blonde comic book girl.
Exactly.
But they're on their campus, which is the Metropolitan University in New York City. His thoughts are elsewhere, though. He's daydreaming about his encounter with the mysterious being in his dream. That evening, Rick and Rambo are out for a walk. They chase off a couple of thugs that were harassing his landlords. And then just a few minutes later, he's passed out on his bed, and his dreams take him to the beach, where he and Alyssa are sitting by the water, chatting, but their engagement's quickly interrupted by this mysterious entity. Alyssa dissolves into the sand, and the ground drops away from beneath Rick, and he resists. He's grabbing on to this entity. He grabs his gleaming medallion from the entity's chest, and the being vanishes from sight, leaving Rick alone on that dream beach. He awakes the following morning. He's feeling much more refreshed than previous mornings. He finds his window, though, is wide open. He catches a news report of a break-in thwarted by some kind of humanoid, bug-eyed monster. A police sketch reveals the same face of the entity from his dreams. That evening at the local amusement park, Rick and Alyssa are discussing his dream demon. While Rick is tired and wants to take her home, she drags him onto the haunted house ride. He dozes off on the ride, and the bug-eyed being appears in a flash of light right in front of Alyssa. This revelation plays havoc on Rick over the next several days. He's afraid to sleep for fear of letting the monster out. It's affecting his efforts on the court. It's affecting his work in school, his overall life. Now, 4 nights later, a practically zombified Rick and Alyssa stop into a food market for some coffee. At the same time, those thugs from before decide to rob the place. Rick gets pistol whipped into a consciousness, which lets the creature out. The thugs shoot at the creature and run out, pushing Alyssa out of the door as well. The creature's quick to pursue and uses his powers to bend a lamppost, impaling it through the hood of their getaway car. The car is flipped, tossing the thugs out in the process. One of the thugs slams into a mailbox, which then proceeds to envelop him or practically eat him. As the second one attacks the creature with a steel pipe. There's a crowd of onlookers that's kind of turned on this creature as well. Powerful beams emanate from the creature's eyes and manipulate the concrete around the would-be attackers. And it kind of grapples them and wraps them up. The last thug gets wrapped up by another lamp pole and really gets twisted like a pretzel. The lamp pole gets twisted like a pretzel, not the thug.
Right.
Alyssa approaches the creature asking who he is. The creature responds, "I am a sleepwalker." It then vanishes from sight as Rick comes to on the floor of the food market. Alyssa meets up with him and catches him up on what just transpired. It's confirmation that whenever Rick sleeps, the sleepwalker comes out. And Rick questions, how is he ever going to sleep again? And then that's the end of that issue. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a really interesting handicap almost to give a superhero. Like, he can only really become a superhero when he's asleep. So like if his, dog gets startled by a squirrel or something and he's in the middle of, taking down some robbers, he's going to just boop.
Yeah, I mean, I wake up 3 times a night to take a piss.
Exactly.
if my alter ego's out there fighting crime and I wake up and then all of a sudden he vanishes in the middle of a major brawl, that doesn't bode well. But it is a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
That I don't know if something like that had been done before. At least not that I'm aware of. I'm sure somebody out there has probably read some old issue of Sandman Mystery Theater that can probably correct me. Right. But it's really unique, in my opinion, to the superhero landscape to feature that. I do miss the days where you could pick up a brand new book with a first issue and have no idea what to expect.
Yeah.
There's no hindrance by decades of continuity. And what's cool about this is, unlike a lot of other origin stories, we don't really know anything yet. Like, we don't know how these two came together.
Right.
We don't know what the Sleepwalker really is or what he actually is. So all we're getting is a lot of setup for this kind of mystery that will unfold over the next, several issues.
Yeah.
And I think that that's pretty unique. And again, we get a lot of information about Rick. We really get to know him as a character. At this point, the Sleepwalker is more of a prop than even a character, because he just kind of shows up and does these things, but there's really not much character behind it yet. And I think it's interesting to go back and rereading the series, kind of how that changes as well. But the art and the storytelling, I mean, like I said, with Alyssa, it is decidedly early 90s.
Very much
like
so.
You cannot mistake this for any other era of comic book other than the early 90s. Exactly. And again, that's a nice change of pace from a few of the more decompressed stories that we'd recently been reading.
Right.
It's not cinematic like you have in recent comics.
No.
And so it helps. One way I think that helps here is that when something is happening to the characters, they're often using like expository dialogue to sort of tell me what's happening, where the guy's like, oh, I'm getting eaten by a mailbox. I don't know that I would have been able to tell that, like, just from the image of this guy inside of a mailbox.
They did do a lot of that back in like the 80s, 90s. You had Spider-Man, for example, Spider-Man swinging through the city, and there'd be 5 panels of him talking about how worried he is about his aunt or something like that. It wasn't just like, okay, he left work, cut to the alleyway where he's fighting a criminal.
Yeah, like the one scene where like the concrete kind of comes alive and wraps him up, and they're like, oh, the concrete's coming alive. I mean,
yeah.
But again, I appreciate that. It's kind of amusing, it's kind of funny, but you really need that with this type of storytelling, because without it, I'd be like, what the hell is even happening in this panel?
Yeah, that's very true. And especially with his powers, it's kind of, with like Cyclops, you shoot somebody with his optic blast, obviously he's shooting lasers out of his eyes.
Right.
With this, it's a little more like, okay, why are his like little eye beams making the, light pole wrap around the guy, or, whatever.
Yep. I want to talk a little bit about Sleepwalker's appearance, because again, and his power set, because it is so unlike anything else character-wise that really we've seen up to that point and since, because he does look just straight up like an alien from like X-Files.
Yeah.
If you put him in like a purple cloak.
Right. He kind of had that the gray alien look from the 90s.
Yep, correct. Yeah, so he's got that definitive alien look. In terms of his power, he's tall, he's lanky. It's, the bio says he can fly. He didn't really do much flying in this first issue. And then he's got that warp gaze that we've talked a little bit about, which is a very cool ability that is, like I said, it's not something that you see very often. Unlike a lot of first issues of this sort, we don't really, like I said, we don't know where he came from. We don't know who he is. So it's not really much of an origin story. And we don't know how he got connected to Rick. So all of that's kind of a mystery that is to be revealed. And I thought that was pretty unique, again, to this type of a first issue. Yeah. This series overall ran for 33 issues, so it didn't have a really long run.
It did.
It ran up until 1994. I do recall a couple of really cool things coming out of this, such as Cobweb is one of his nemesises, who's a very cool-looking character.
Very much so.
And then I think the second issue even features 8-Ball.
8-Ball is my favorite.
8-Ball's amazing.
Just because he was so ridiculous and it's a concept that shouldn't work. But
yeah, just if anyone, if you're watching this or listening to this and you don't know who or what 8-Ball is, just think of a regular dude with a giant 8-Ball on his head
and a super powered pool cue.
Pool cue, yeah, his pool stick,
like
is his weapon.
He could tap a table with it and it would go shooting off at somebody.
Yeah, so
it was really. It was the 90s, man.
Yeah.
We came up with some weird shit.
It was like I said, it was a wild time.
One of my favorite things, it didn't happen in his comic run, but this was around the time too where they had Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War, Infinity Crusade, where they had those crossover ones.
Yep.
And Infinity Crusade actually did something pretty unique with him. They had Sleepwalker spike Rick's orange juice. So that he could continue fighting.
Oh, nice. All right. So
he's just in this meeting.
So no waking up because the guy's getting tranked.
Well, yeah, but he's in the meeting with all these superheroes and stuff, and they're he just all of a sudden goes boop, just pops out of existence, and they're like, well, where'd Sleepwalker go? And then the next scene, you see him taking a drink of his orange juice, passes out, and he's like, I really hated to drug him, but I need to get back to work or something. It was kind of, it was just. Off the wall stuff they did in the 90s, but it was still cool.
That's awesome. He did appear a few times since, but he's never really had much, much of a presence.
He wasn't. I think the last time I remember seeing him, and this is an alternate, whatever, since they came up with that whole multiverse thing. I think the Exiles.
Oh yeah,
used to have a series where it was these. D-list.
Yeah,
it was a team made up of D-list
Blink
characters.
And I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
sort of. I've never read an Exiles comic.
No, it's just I remember him being in one. I was like, oh, Sleepwalker's still around.
That's just kind of a guest appearance in one. Yeah, he did have a crossover. I picked up the trade of it of a recent Infinity Warps, I think it was, that I actually had gone through and read just recently. It wasn't bad. It was all right. Because he's such an obscure character, that's what really draws me to him. I love the obscure characters. If I was to ever if someone was like, Jonah, write us a comic book and you can, who would you want to write? I'd be like, dude, Sleepwalker would be at the top of my list.
Yeah.
He would be so much fun to mess around with. It is learned, over the course of the series that, Sleepwalkers, they're guardians of the Mindscape dimension. I think I might have said Dreamscape earlier. I think it's actually called the Mindscape. Dimension, and that borders on the minds of all sentient beings. They protect the Mindscape from evil entities that try to enter the minds of the sentient beings and drive them mad. And so it's cool. He's like a interdimensional cop, so to speak, which is a very cool concept. Again, this is a weird time. I'm sure you can pick up this copy pretty cheaply if you want to read it. You could probably pick up the whole run. In quarter bins. I don't think any of them fetch really a lot of money at this point.
Yeah.
I've got almost the whole run. I think there's maybe a couple of issues that I'm missing that I got to fill in, but it's a really fun series. It's a really cool character. And again, it's so different than your X-Men, your Avengers, your Spider-Man at the time.
Yeah.
So different.
He's not just running up and punching a guy in the face, because I really, other than a few spare times, I don't think he's really much of a physical.
Well, I mean, no. If you look at him, he's a string bean. He's not much to look at in terms of
looks like a scarecrow,
bulk.
Basically.
Yeah, very much so.
He's not.
Yeah. So be sure to check out the issue. It's a lot of fun. You can find us again, the Number One Comics Podcast. You can find us on Facebook. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. Maybe, I don't know where people find podcasts at. I'm just the talking head. And also you can leave us send us an email at the number one comic podcast @gmail.com. Subscribe, let us know your thoughts. Appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you next time. I'm Jonah, and this is Bill.
See ya.